Good morning. Like Joseph said, my name is Carl Christian Johannesson. I'm a staff attorney with Matt, and we're going to look at some frequently asked questions about elections. These are just things that we've seen appear over time, and they're just issues that we'd like to expand upon a little bit and try to help provide further guidance. Another note, questions. It's probably a good chance I'll tackle most of them at the end, but if I see that they're especially pertinent to what's going on in the discussion at the time, I may tackle them there. So just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about kind of 3 distinct time periods regarding elections. You have before the election, and so these are the things you would submit to the county auditor, your ballot questions, your candidacy, just the schedules and things you have to do leading up to the election, as well as the appointment of election judges and what that would look like. During the election, there's not a lot there, but there are 2 big things that I want to address, just kind of the overall rules regarding the polling place, and then in an emergency changing the polling place, and then everything else will be after the election, where we'll be discussing canvassing and challenges and recounts and taking offices. So like I said, first thing I want to discuss are ballot questions. So ballot questions come up a lot. There are a few places they can only be used if they're statutorily authorized. So there are a few places in Minnesota law. A key example of one is when the town is adopting an alternate form of town governance, like having 5 supervisors rather than 3 supervisors on the town board, or making the clerk or the treasurer an appointed position rather than an elected position, or combining the clerk and treasurer positions. Those are issues that you would put on the ballot for voters to approve or disapprove of. But in general, when the town board seeks to put a question on the ballot, the board would pass a resolution regarding that they want the question to be placed on the ballot. The clerk will send notice of that to the election notice. And then the voters at the annual election either vote yes to adopt the question or vote no to adopt the question at the annual or at a special election. Another note is that the language of the question to be utilized in the ballot will be within the statute. So like Minnesota 36730, it gives sample language to be put on the ballot, and then you would ask the ballot, the voters yes or no regarding that question. Next, I want to talk about qualifications for office. As you see here, we're going to be covering a lot of different topics, but all this comes under the same topic of elections, but they're just a lot of different facets, and they're connected kind of time-wise. But anyway, so qualifications for office. The most key qualifications, these are the things that either make you eligible or ineligible for office, are the constitutional requirements. So those requirements are being eligible as a town to vote in the town election, filed as a candidate for only one position in the current election. So you can't file as a clerk and as a supervisor and just kind of hope to get one of those 2. You have to be 21 years old at the time of taking office. So you can run for office if you're still 20, but you must be 21 years old at the time of taking office. And then you also have to be a resident of the township for at least 30 days prior to the election. One thing I do want to address is in the eligible to vote column, that does mean you have to be a citizen, and that does mean you can't be restricted for another reason. We'll also be discussing incompatible positions coming up, but essentially these are positions in which one, you can't hold both of these offices at the same time due to certain statutory issues or other common law issues. Things inherently that don't affect your qualification for office. Being a family member does not disallow you from holding office. So you could be both you and a grandparent, or you and a parent, or you and a spouse could serve as town supervisors. There are townships where husband and wife will serve as either clerk and treasurer, or treasurer and supervisor, or clerk and supervisor. So that's not a disqualifying factor. The same is true with being a landowner. Being a landowner or not being a landowner does not affect your qualification for office. You could have a gentleman who owns land in Minnesota but lives in California. That would not allow him to be eligible for town office. And then a criminal history doesn't inherently affect your ability to hold office. This means that if you are eligible to vote in the town election and you have some sort of criminal history that maybe has taken your eligibility away at some point, but now you are able to vote again, then you can also hold town office. So incompatible positions, like I referenced before, so there are two types of incompatibilities. Essentially, these are positions employed or elected that cannot be held by a town officer. So there's the statutory incompatibility, where Minnesota law has, or the Minnesota legislature has specifically referenced certain positions that you can't hold. So these are being the police or police or fire chief of a civil service commission, or sorry, police and fire joint civil service commission member. That's a mouthful. You can't be a county sheriff. However, you can be a deputy. You can't be a county commissioner. You can't be the assessor in the township or the assessor for the county that governs the township. You can't be a legislator. In urban townships, you can't be a member of the school board. You can't be a park district commissioner. There are just a lot. And the Minnesota legislature put out a list of many of these positions back in 2014. And if you need any further guidance on maybe what positions are and aren't incompatible, you can either reach out to the staff attorneys at MAT or look for that list. It's fairly easy to find. As for common law incompatibility, so these are certain offices, although not discussed in statutory law, but are discussed in case law. And it shows that these offices are incompatible if their functions are inconsistent, their performance results in antagonism and a conflict of duty, so that the incumbent of one office cannot discharge with fidelity and propriety the duties of both, or if it can interfere with the supervision over another. So common ones are department heads, so fire chief of a township cannot also be a town officer, because the fire chief is going to have a certain disposition to benefit the fire department. In the same way, deputy or treasurer and a clerk cannot be deputies of each other. So your clerk cannot be the deputy treasurer and your treasurer cannot be the deputy clerk, because that would interfere with the supervision of either office. So next topic is campaigning, and we'll go through campaigning, campaign finance, and just kind of the general rules regarding that. So just generally campaigning, there are statutory restrictions in leading up to the election. You can't bribe someone, you can't threaten someone for a vote, you can't promise appointments, you can't if you're on the other side of things, you can't force someone to become a candidate. You also can't falsely claim party support if one of the parties doesn't support you. You cannot claim that. And then another statutory one is using the phrase re-elect if not an incumbent. This means that if you're not running for a position that you already hold, you cannot use the phrase re-elect. So that means even a clerk who is then running for a supervisor position cannot use the phrase re-elect in any campaigning. Then one that maybe isn't specifically addressed in statutory law, but it's using town positional authority to influence the voters, so that you can't promote your campaign at a town board meeting. You can't use your positional authority to try to influence voters to vote one way or another. And then specifically on election day, well, you can't persuade voters within 100 feet of the polling place. Wearing campaign material at the polling place is very limited. This is in Minnesota. The statute says it's restricted, but there's certain case law that rubs against that statute. And then an interesting one is, while transporting voters to and from the polling place, you cannot ask who they're going to vote for. You can't solicit a vote from them, and you can't persuade them to vote in a certain way. And I'm not, in my research, I haven't seen any sort of familial exception to this. So just be careful when you're even transporting family members on election day, that you're not really discussing the voting procedure, which may seem odd, but it's just to be safe in general. So campaign finance, like it says here, it can be a complex issue, but that's not gonna happen for most townships. Speaking with certain clerks, I haven't seen this issue appear frequently. So for campaign finance, there are two general categories. So, and it all centers around this $750 amount, which is funds that are spent or received in a calendar year regarding the candidacy. So those who received and spent less than $750 regarding their campaign, they must file a report, simply file a report with the town clerk saying that you did not spend or receive that amount. But if you did spend more than that, and from what I've heard, the Secretary of State's office is very helpful in working with this process if it so comes up. If more than $750 is spent or received in a calendar year, you must first, the candidate must first file a report within 14 days of meeting that threshold to the town clerk. They must also file a report 10 days prior to the election, again with the town clerk, and then they must file a report 30 days after the election, again with the town clerk. So the big question here is, why is this important? Well, there are penalties if you don't follow it. So the first and foremost, the first penalty, and why it's important, is the clerk can't issue certificates of election until these reports are received. So this includes, also includes if you do not report campaign finance issues, up to a $5,000 fine, and this could also include a misdemeanor or a felony, as well as forfeiture of office if the clerk did issue a certificate of election. And this forfeiture also includes being appointed to the same office for the period you were supposed to remain in office. If any violation occurs, it doesn't go through the normal court system and instead works through the Minnesota Office of Administrative Hearings. And this office is the one who would issue these penalties. For polling places, so these must be designated by December 31st of the previous year. So for townships looking at their polling places for 2021, they must be designated by December 31st in 2020. This can be changed due to an emergency detailed in Minnesota Statute 204B.175. It can also be changed if the polling place is unavailable. And from my research, it seems that this emergency detailed and this unavailability are relatively under the same kind of theory. So Essentially, it means that if the polling place is cannot be reached by voters, it can be changed. So if the polling place is closed for whatever reason, or if it's burned down, any of these issues would relate back to the polling place being unavailable or an emergency being present. The other one is for towns with November elections, with November town elections. The town can designate one polling place for any and all state and federal elections, and the other for only town elections. And so, especially in considering COVID-19, if the town has two polling places available, they could certainly try to separate the voters in some degree and better promote social distancing with that. Also, due to COVID-19, the Minnesota legislature passed a law for 2020 that allows towns to designate their polling place by July 1st, again, of 2020. And so, yeah. Election judges. So when looking for an election judge can be any person who is eligible to vote in Minnesota, able to read, write, and speak English, is trained and currently certified as an election judge, and this training occurs through the county auditor, and the county auditor may delegate that training to others. And then for the election judges, have declared their party affiliation with the major political party if they are so affiliated with that party. They may not be affiliated with a major political party, and so that only applies if their party declaration, if they've declared their party affiliation. I apologize. Things that would disqualify you from being an election judge would be a candidate in an election, if you are related to a candidate in the election, and this is only in your immediate family, so spouse, parent, child, sibling, or if you live with, so it could be a significant other as well. You can also not be an election judge serving congruently at the same time with a spouse, parent, child, or a sibling. So same precinct, same time. But so if you're, oh no. So if there's a morning shift and a evening shift, you and your spouse, one could work the morning shift and the other could work the evening shift. You also cannot be a challenger. And so challengers are a specific people. There's someone asked, oftentimes by a candidate, to challenge another person's eligibility to vote if they have personal knowledge on why the person may or may not be eligible to vote. I haven't heard of challenger issues occurring in a township, but that is always a possibility. Furthermore, for election judges, an election judge usually has to be able to vote in the state of Minnesota, but you can also have election judge trainees, and these are 16 and 17-year-olds who can be election judges, but they incur certain restrictions. So they cannot contribute to the minimum requirement of election judges. A precinct needs 4 election judges. Unless the township is smaller, then it could only need 3. But these trainees could not contribute to that minimum requirement. They also cannot serve with party affiliation. They're 16 and 17, so they shouldn't really have party affiliation at that point, but they cannot serve with that either. They can't participate in activities that require party affiliation. And then they also can't be more than 1/3 of the total number of election judges. So if you have 4 election judges, you can only have 1 election judge trainee. The process for appointing an election judge can include the town clerk receiving a list of qualified judges from the county auditor, who received that from the state Secretary of State's office. But I know that in many townships, that list is not provided. But if that list is provided, the town clerk can recommend candidates from that list to the town board. And if there is no list provided, the town clerk can recommend others who qualify, who are eligible to vote, who are able to read, write, and speak English, who are trained and currently certified, and have declared their party affiliation if they have one. And then if once receiving those candidates, the town board by resolution appoints the election judges, and we have sample resolutions on our website. And again, they must be qualified as election judges, but the town board can appoint those who are outside of the clerk's recommendation. Election judges are paid at a rate set by the town board that must be at or above minimum wage, and election judges are considered employees of the township, so they would be given W-2s rather than 1099s. This includes no matter how much they are paid, but election judges are considered employees of the township. Election judges, to meet this training qualification, must be trained for at least 2 hours every 2 years. And then the head election judge must be trained for an extra hour. And if you have election judges that are willing to take this head election judge training, you can have as many election judges as you like take this head election judge training, and it could probably help streamline many issues in the township, or if the head election judge is unavailable for whatever reason. Like I said before, election judge training is conducted by the county auditor. The county auditor can delegate this training, but it is still at the discretion of the county auditor how this training is conducted and where and when, unless delegated for those purposes. Like I said before, there must be at least 4 election judges per precinct, and there must be 4 election judges in the township. If there are fewer than 500 voters, then you can bring that number down to 3. But in any case, at least 2 judges must be of opposing parties. And then if there is a vacancy, like I said before, if the head election judge is unable to attend for whatever reason, either the remaining election judges or the town clerk may fill that vacancy with another qualified person. And in many townships, what might be prudent is to have those members of the town board and the treasurer take election judge training so that they can be available in case these issues present themselves. And then they can come quickly fill that vacancy. So long, again, as they're not candidates in the election. If they are candidates in the election, that automatically disqualifies them from acting as an election judge. So I want to talk about 3 election schedules. We'll be looking at the March elections, the November elections, and elections done through mail balloting. Each of these have some different dates that I want to point out. I'm just going to quickly go through them. If I have any extra notes regarding any of these dates, I'll expand on that. So for March, 84 days prior to the March election date, the clerk must publish a notice for affidavits of candidacy that they can be submitted, that they will be required. They can be submitted 74 days prior, or 70 days prior to the election. Excuse me. So the clerk must publish this notice, publishing meaning it must be in the generally circulated newspaper. 74 days prior to the election, the clerk must send notice of the election to the county auditor. This includes the polling place and those general issues, unless that changes after that 74-day time limit. But the big thing here is if there are any ballot questions, be sure to submit that to the county auditor as well. 70 days to 56 days prior to the election is the period in which the township can receive candidate affidavits of candidacy. And then on the final day of that, the clerk must keep their office open from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. so that those affidavits can be submitted in person. 54 days, so 2 days after that affidavit of candidacy period ends, that would be the last day for a candidate to withdraw their candidacy. And then March elections are different than both mail elections and November elections regarding the absentee voting. March elections begin the absentee voting period 30 days prior to the election, where in November's elections it's 46 days prior. The Saturday prior to the election, the clerk's office must be open from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. to receive absentee ballots. And then within 2 days after the election, the board must canvass the returns. The town board must canvass the returns. And then within 7 days after that canvassing, or 7 days after that canvassing, the clerk can issue the certificates of election. And then once received, the candidate has 10 days to file that certificate of election with the town clerk and take an oath of office. Like I said, for November elections, they're different than March elections. Time frames have been expanded. Like we see here, rather than the 84 days prior to the election, you have 8 days prior to the election, which you must publish notice to file the affidavit of candidacy. Again, 84 days prior, you work with those. It's the last day to file your affidavit, and then 82 days becomes the final day to withdraw. Like I said, 46 days prior to the election is when absentee voting begins for November elections and every other election in Minnesota other than March town elections. And then the Saturday prior to the election, the clerk's office must be open for an extended period of time rather than from 1 p.m. to 12 p.m. or sorry, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. They must be open from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then also on the Monday prior to the election, the clerk's office must be open until 5 p.m. again to submit those absentee ballots. And then the canvassing period is between 3 and 10 days after the election, so you cannot canvass returns immediately after the election. And then you also do not take office as soon as you submit or file your oath of office and affidavit of candidacy with the clerk, but rather in the first Monday beginning after the new year is when these elected officers take office. Mail balloting, I'm going to go through this maybe in more detail than the other two. The town board, in order to adopt mail balloting, they must pass a resolution and then send that resolution to the county auditor for approval to adopt mail balloting. That resolution must be passed 90 days prior to the following election. So if you're going to do it for the upcoming November election, you would have to submit that, or you would have to pass a resolution by August 5th. You also must notify the county no later than 2 weeks after passing the resolution. So if you pass it July 1st, you must notify the county by July 14th. If you pass it August 5th, you must notify the county by August 19th, which is 76 days prior to the election. So the rule says within 2 weeks, and so this means you can pass the resolution 90 days prior to the election, but you must notify the county no later than 2 weeks after passing the resolution. 10 weeks prior to the election, the town must give the first notice of the election. This includes additional requirements for the first mail-in election, and the county auditor will certainly help you with those issues, or reach out to one of the attorneys at MAP, and we'd also be able to provide the additional information there. Mail ballots, the first delivery starts 46 days prior to the election, much like the absentee ballots in the November election. And then they are continued to be delivered up until 14 days prior to the election. And then the ballot boards start immediately as soon as ballots are being delivered. So ballot boards can start taking in the ballots, start counting the ballots, and starting that process. The notice of the election and sample ballots must be published at least 14 days prior to the election. So if you're doing any in-person voting in these mail elections, the notice of the election and the sample ballots must be published 14 days prior to the election. Notice of the election and sample ballots may be posted instead rather than published in the newspaper, and this has to be done 10 days prior to the election. Again, auditor or municipal clerk's office, whoever is conducting the election, must be open from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. to receive ballots, and for until 5 p.m. on Monday, again, to receive ballots for either mail voting or absentee voting. On election day, so there are some key differences here. Any ballot received before 8 p.m. must be counted. The office of the clerk or the auditor must be open as a polling place. At least 2 election judges must be present at the office to accept ballots on election day. And the counting must be open for public observation wherever that is done. So it can't be in some remote, secluded area. It needs to be open to the public, and most likely somewhere like the clerk's office would work the best. And then 24 days after the polling place closes, the ballot board members must verify which ballots were rejected and which were approved. Then one other topic I want to touch on before getting actually into the election period are special elections. So these can be held on the second can only be held on limited days throughout the year. That's a fairly recent change in Minnesota law, but it's a change nonetheless, and we are only able to have an election on the special election on the second Tuesday in February, second Tuesday in April, second Tuesday in May and August, or the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. As for special elections, they can be used for 2 main purposes. You can use them to present ballot questions to the voters if they weren't submitted within the last 6 months. So you can't have a special election in February to ask whether clerks should be appointed, and then that fails, and then again in April to ask if clerks should be appointed. That wouldn't be a large enough time frame. But again, when doing these special elections, you have to be able to meet the standard time frame as presented in Minnesota law, and usually following the November schedule is better. And then special elections can be used to fill vacancies in office if the town board is unable to fill those vacancies. And I just want to make a quick note here that in the materials, there is a larger outline kind of addressing most of these topics in more detail, as well as providing the statutory or case reference regarding these issues. So moving on, so looking at the polling place, there are a couple of topics I want to address. So first of all, your minimum voting hours. So for your town elections on election day, all that needs to be open is the vote polling place, and this is for non-metropolitan towns. They have to be open from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. on election day. If the town is in the 11 county metro, it must be open from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then when general and state elections are also involved, general elections, state primaries are also involved, the polling place must be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then just a side note, town meetings cannot at least occur during the evenings of these elections. So in many times you'll wonder if you can have a town board meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. or from 6 to 7 p.m. on election day in March, and that's not permitted. But you can have a meeting as soon as the clock ticks 8:01. The town board may also provide meals for election judges, and then also in the canvassing board, they can provide meals for the town board members. Another issue I want to address, and this is in further detail in that outline, but there is voter assistance. So you have 3 types of voter assistance all found in the same statute. You have the assistance of marking ballots. So if someone is unable to mark their own ballots, 2 election judges may assist the voter in marking the ballot and make a good faith effort in making sure that everything is marked the correct way. And when you have 2 election judges go, you must make sure that they're from 2 different major political parties. Curbside voting, if a member of the public is unable to, and this can be for whatever reason they are unable to exit their vehicle, they can vote from inside their vehicle. The 2 election judges, from major different political parties, may bring out the registration and the voting to the voter's motor vehicle and give that information to the voter. Voting lines is in all polling places. 2 election judges can assist a disabled voter in entering the polling place, go through registration and voting lines, and then, the voter from there can request additional assistance if they so desire. And then immediately after the election, the election judges must deliver the materials to the town clerk or the county auditor within 24 hours. The polling place is closing. This includes all spoiled and voted on ballots, 2 sets of summary statements regarding the ballots, and any materials as noticed in a checklist provided by the county auditor. And then on the way back, the clerks or election judges who are associated in this need to receive a record from the county auditor saying that they did so. Also within 24 hours, the election judges must return to the clerk the remaining summary statements and returns, all unused and spoiled ballots, complete voter registration applications, counting rosters, and voting systems. And then the clerk will work in bringing that back to the county. So after the election has happened, after the ballots have been counted, after the summary statements have been written, the town board of canvass convenes. Town board of canvass is the town board of supervisors. Like I said earlier, they must meet within 2 days after the election for March elections. So this can be as late as Thursday after the Tuesday March election, or between 3 and 10 days after the November elections. For the process is fairly simple. Again, the clerk just prepares a report that accumulates the results of the election. The board takes an oath of office, reviews the summary statements and the reports provided to them, and then when they're satisfied that they're correct, the board signs the results, and then they become the official results. In this process, the board does not touch the ballots. The board is just reviewing statements as provided for them. If it's determined that there is a tie, the board decides the winner by lots. So this can be by flipping a coin, which is common. Another way it's been done is splitting a deck of cards. If there is a tie, the board decides the winner by lots or by chance. And usually the best way to go about that is through flipping a coin. If it's been determined that an election judge has erred, both candidates must agree in writing that there was an obvious error, and this agreement is submitted to the county for review. How we determine that Not entirely sure, but if both candidates agree that there's an error by the election judge, then the issue can be submitted to the county. Contests. So a contest is a challenge to the results of an election, seeking a specific remedy from the district court. An election can be contested by the candidate or an affected voter, so it's not just limited to the candidate, but if you're a voter in the jurisdiction, you can also challenge the results in court. And the contest period for the election is 7 days after, I apologize, it's not the election, but it's the after the results have become official. So this could be from a Tuesday or a Thursday to Thursday in March elections, or up to 17 days after the election can be the length of this contest period in November elections. If someone wishes to contest an election, they must file this contest with the clerk of the district court that presides over this election or the candidate. And if the town is concerned that a contest may occur, notify both the town attorney and the county auditor. The county auditor for the purposes of making sure that election materials aren't changed, so that all the data and all the issues are in good condition, and then the town attorney for obvious reasons, so that they can help you through this period and guide the township in the best way to go. As for a recount can be requested by a candidate for his own candidacy or regarding ballot questions. If 25 vote or if 25, sorry, I got that wrong. A recount may be requested by the candidate in the election to recount the results again, or for ballot questions, if 25 voters file a petition with the town clerk, then a recount can be done there. The recount would be done at the expense of the town rather than the petitioners. If the election had 400 to 50,000 voters and the winner won by 0.5%, or in elections with fewer than 400 voters if the winner won by 10 or fewer votes. Otherwise, the cost of the recount would be borne with by the petitioners. In taking office, so this is after the contest period, the clerk has issued the certificate of election. The official or the purported official has 10 days to take the oath of office and certify that they have done so with the town clerk. The oath of office can be conducted by any town officer or a notary, so it doesn't have to be taken with just the clerk or taken with just a notary, but you can also do so with another supervisor or with the treasurer. If the officer takes actions prior to taking this oath of office, they must forfeit $50 to the town. Now, if you are a supervisor and as the incumbent you won and you acted prior to taking the oath of office, your current office is continuing until you take the oath of office again. So you wouldn't forfeit $50 to the town. It's just a continuing act. So the previous officer continues until the successor qualifies. When you're switching between March and November elections, so this can be started in two ways. This can be initiated by the town board. The town board passes a resolution and indicates the plans on how to shorten or lengthen terms of office. Oftentimes, what happens in November elections is town supervisors are given 6-year terms, and clerks and treasurers are given 4-year terms. And so in this resolution, you must detail on how the election changes, who usually would gain time spent in office and who would lose time, so that the schedules are correct. If it's initiated by the voters, they can do so at the annual meeting. and they must indicate a plan on how to lengthen or shorten the office as well. If the resolution is passed, the question must be submitted to voters at the annual election. And so voters would review that plan and then vote yes or no regarding that plan. And then the elections will be switched to March or November. To return to March elections after adopting the November elections, you have to have conducted March elections for 2 years or 2 election cycles. So if you only have an election every other year, it could be up to 4 years in which you need to wait to return to March elections. The town board must unanimously pass a resolution indicating its intent to return, and then again submit that question to voters by ballot question. And the last thing I want to discuss is remote balloting. This will include mail balloting in a short capacity because we already discussed that at length. Provisional balloting, which is not available in Minnesota, but it's essentially an expanded version of absentee voting. And then again, absentee voting, which allows people who are unable to make it to the polling place, who applied to be absentee voters to vote absentee. There are 2 forms of absentee, or 2 large forms of absentee voter. You have UOCAVA absentee, which is the Uniformed Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act. So this will often apply to military members. UOCAVA is handled exclusively by the county, so the town does not contribute in that. The town may contribute in the Minnesota process, the standard absentee process, but only during November elections, or if delegated by the county. If the town conducts absentee voting, the town must, 1, designate a polling place to do the absentee voting. Again, be available from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on March elections on the Saturday prior to the election, and until 5 p.m. the Monday prior. And again, remember, in November elections, that time frame extends from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. rather than to 12 p.m. And then the ballot board has to be established by resolution to review the votes, and those who apply for absentee votes must receive their ballots at least 30 days prior to the election. The quick notes I want to make about mail balloting. So this makes the entire election remote. People can come to the polling place, but generally you're going to vote remotely. To switch to mail balloting, again, you must pass a resolution at least 90 days prior to the election, and if you want to adopt the procedure, and then notify the county auditor within 2 weeks. That is everything from me. I prepared. We've got a few questions for now. So the first one I want to address is, do we have to publish, or can we just post the election hours? I believe you have to publish the election hours. And so these hours are part in that election notice. But if you do post the election notice rather than publish the election notice, then posting would be adequate. But you either have to do one or the other. You can't pick and choose what parts you want to post and what parts you want to publish. Another question is, can we only be open from 10 to 8 in the general election? No. For the general election, or during the state primaries, the polling place must be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. And so, again, yeah, the primary election hours do need to be from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you have any further questions, certainly you can send a question and I'll answer that. Otherwise.
All right. Thank you, Carl Christian. As he noted, there is time for additional questions. So to our audience members, if you have additional questions, go ahead and submit those using the Q&A box. That box is readily available for you to utilize to submit a question. If not, I do want to remind our audience that the downloadable link for viewing the presentation materials is in the chat box. In addition, today's program is not accredited for continuing education credit, but certificates of participation will be provided in addition to a full program recording. Carl Christian, looks like we just got a comment from Tarina. She said, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and just make last. Oh, go ahead, Carl Christian.
Yeah, looking in the chat, there does seem to be at least one question in there from Diane Knoll. If you have a township March elections, there is no need to designate a location. The presentation states that only towns with November elections. Can a spouse be election judge if they work a different shift? A spouse can be an election judge if they work a different shift, correct? November. Another one, I understand the finance report on our website. Is this for all candidates or only those who are elected? What's the time frame for putting them on our website and how long do they have to be on? I apologize, Sue. I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head. I believe there is I'm trying to remember, I don't recall the number of years. So yeah, if you want to send me an email, I'll certainly be happy to answer that question.
Okay, we'll go ahead and make a final call for questions before we close out today's program. So, final call for questions. All right, Carl Christian, it looks like we don't have any more questions. So if you'd like to make a final statement, please do that. I'll go ahead and close out today's program.
Yep. Well, I just want to thank you all for attending and listening. Again, if you have any questions about the presentation or any questions in general, please don't be afraid to reach out to the MAT attorneys to work through that.
Okay, thanks, Carl Christian, for your presentation, and to all of our attendees who attended today. Everybody be safe and have a wonderful weekend to the best of your ability. Bye-bye.